Hi, this is Dan Joseph. I am the technical guru behind the official Myron Cope channel here on YouTube. Before we get started, I wanted to thank two people in particular. One is Roxanne Stewart. Now, she is the niece of Ed and Wendy King, who hosted a popular show on KDKA for many years called Party Line. She had the tapes, the long-lost, long unknown to exist tapes that contain what appears to be Myron Cope's first times on the radio on KDKA in the mid-1950s. This was on a show called Off the Cuff, hosted by Ed King, where four people were gathered before a microphone to discuss a topic that, I guess, Ed King found interesting. The second person I need to thank is Sean Cogan of Primo Digitization Services. He extracted the shows that you're about to hear from the audio tapes I mentioned, reel-to-reel audio tapes that Ed King saved and Wendy King preserved after her husband's death until her own passing a few years ago. Now, to my ears, there are a couple things to listen for on these shows. One is the stark difference between talk shows of 70 years ago and the ones you hear today. These shows from the 1950s, everyone's trying to be very polite, very nice. There's no swearing and there's no yelling. In fact, on the second of these shows, you can hear Myron getting a little bit miffed, not so much at the talk show itself, but at the trend in society at the time for everybody to be very dignified. I think Myron was ready for the more raucous and more freewheeling era, both in the radio industry and in the sports world, that would be coming down the road a few years later. The other big difference is Myron himself. At this point, he's 26 years old, he's a full-time sports writer for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and he has not even a hint of the broadcast persona he later became famous for. There's no yoy here. There's no okle-dokle and no ha. In fact, Myron sounds a little bit nervous, like a guy who's having his first time on the radio and is trying hard to fit in. Now, that said, it's still Myron Cope. He's still funny, he's intelligent, and he's still got that buzzsaw of a voice. And you can see why eventually executives at WTAE Radio decided we have to put this guy on the air. So please sit back and enjoy these two historic radio shows. The first one comes from September 30th, 1955, and on the panel features KDKA's morning man at the time, Rege Cordic. The other one is from September 12th, 1956. That one on the panel features KDKA's roving reporter, Mike Levine, in addition to Myron Cope.
This is Off the Cuff, a candid, unrehearsed, transcribed talk feast with four friends Ed King has invited in to tell what they do with $1 million tax-free dollars. And here's Ed.
I guess everybody at one time or another has pursued the interesting mental gambit. If you had $1 million, what would you do with it? $1 million tax-free dollars, and all we say is they have to spend it. They can't give any to charity. They can't make any investments with it. They have to spend $1 million tax-free dollars. They being Myron Cope from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette Sports Department, Faye Parker, Pittsburgh author and actress, Rege Cordic of Cordic and Company, and Dorothy Randall, fashion and beauty and shopping editor of the Pittsburgh Sun-Telegraph. Rege, if you had $1 million, what would you do? What was the first thing you have in mind with this $1 million?
Well, the first thing I would do, I think, Ed, would be to line up all the cops in the city of Pittsburgh and pick the meanest one and hire him for the front porch to keep salesmen away.
Boy, that would be a problem, wouldn't it?
I met him last week, Rege. He gave me a tag for driving half a block with my lights on.
Well, Myron, you won't have any more troubles with minor things like traffic tickets. Not with $1 million. That'll pay an awful lot of traffic fines. What's the first thing you'd do, Myron?
Well, I think, I don't know if I would do it immediately, but the choicest thing which I would do would be to make up a list of all the statesmen who I have suspected of being phony and see how many I could bribe.
Well, you know, actually, with this $1 million, I should think that instead of this cop stashing him out in the bushes in front of your house,
I think it would be fun.
you would automatically set yourself up in the sort of house where you were so private and away from things, with probably a gatekeeper, but you wouldn't have any of those problems about salesmen pounding on the door or ringing the bell.
Oh, some of the salesmen I know have the doggonedest ways of getting, tunnel in through the cellar and that sort of thing.
I used to sell baby pictures when I went to college, and I could get into your house. I guarantee you.
That's what I mean.
You sold your own baby pictures, Myron? Was there much demand?
Well, those weren't sellable, but I sold appointments for babies who get photographed.
Oh, I see. Myron, do you feel you'd pay off the house and take care of a few minor debts right off the bat? Or don't
No,
you
I don't
have
own a
such
house. I think first thing I probably would do, I might do it, but my employers might be listening here. I might quit my job.
Faye, what would you do?
Well, I think I'd be practical, Ed. The first thing I'd think about is the future of the children. Could I buy their education ahead of time? I think that's the very first thing I would do. I'd be sure that they get to a good school and have a chance to study and learn.
What a way to worry about $1 million. I don't have a house, and I don't have any children, and I don't have a wife. I think I could enjoy this
You'd
million.
probably get all five if you just had that million, wouldn't you?
But I maintain that $1 million is not a lot of money in this day and age, and that you could get through $1 million in no time at all. Now, if you said $10 million, if you named that as a
That's pretty greedy, I think, Myron.
Well, no, it's not greedy. I mean, $1 million would just get you warmed to the task.
$50,000 a year for 20 years is what it would be, isn't it?
About that.
That's a lot of
There's
money.
a time limit as to when this money must be spent.
Well, according to you, it's barely going to last you a week. Now, you know, Dorothy, you mentioned decorating the apartment and buying new clothes, and Faye, you mentioned education for the children. Let's come back to Myron's problem here. He says that you people are buying an awful lot of troubles with your $1 million.
I think they're multiplying their troubles.
Well, we're getting back to a pretty basic thing, which says the love of money is the root of all evil.
But
Well, you're going to get your children educated so well, and you're going to buy them the best education available, and then you're going to turn around and be ashamed of you.
They're going to say, what a silly thing my mother did.
That's like like the gamblers who put their children through college so they can grow up and be ashamed of their fathers.
I haven't even played bridge lately, Myron.
Well, what are you going to do, Myron?
Yeah, I'm beginning to wonder what.
Well, I think that there are plenty of things to do. Travel. There are a lot of places I would like to see. As I said, I would like to test the sincerity of a lot of statesmen whose opinions I have listened to.
You don't have to travel to do that.
righteously.
You don't have to travel to do that. Where would you travel to?
Where would I travel to? Well, I have never been to Paris, and that's a rather obvious place to go, but I'd like to be obvious in this case and see Paris first, and then find the less conspicuous places. I know what I would like. I just got a brilliant idea.
Yes, Myron.
I would like to finance a Dixieland band in Pittsburgh.
That's a good idea. That's a good way to spend $1 million.
Pittsburgh.
You sure that wouldn't be considered charity?
No, that would be a contribution to the arts, and Pittsburgh has never sustained Dixieland music. They bring in a Dixieland outfit, and they never seem to draw. So I will be the
Impresario.
Entrepreneur.
And I'll sustain Dixieland music here.
They'll put a statue up to you in Cope Park, the man that brought Dixieland to Pittsburgh.
Well, I'll come and hear the band after I park the engine.
And Myron, as far as I'm concerned, I'll go, and when I've gotten through buying new curtains and running for the apartment, we'll probably move out of the thing so I can be farther away from where this Dixieland is. Yeah, that's not.
The fact that you would definitely continue working. Myron, you think you'd quit the job?
I'd take a leave of absence.
As far as you're going to go.
Myron licking his chops when he said that.
Yes, I was wondering why you didn't buy a newspaper of your own.
Sure.
Well, that would be an investment, wouldn't it? Although under my hands it would undoubtedly fail and lose money. But I'd buy a newspaper, and in order to comply with the rules of this discussion, which is that it shan't be an investment, I would take no advertising in this newspaper, and I would figure it's going to run so long and then die. But in that period of time, I would expound all the personal opinions which no sane newspaper publisher would ever publish, and
You wouldn't mind fighting off libel suits? You have this $1 million.
I would measure my libel suits to make sure they won't go beyond that $1 million. As I say, that $1 million is not a lot of money. That $10 million would be much safer.
There are people operating that way today, though, aren't there?
They have what?
There are people operating publications like that today. I've seen a couple who shall be nameless.
Well, how do they do it? They must have more than that $1 million to start with.
I guess so, yeah.
Do you think
Listen, I think it would change me. I think I'd have a lot more nerve. You know, if somebody comes in and tells you, well, I want you to do this. Well, I don't think I'll do it today. I'm going out and shine the lens on the locomotive. So there. And definitely it would change. I guarantee you that.
It would educate you, too. I know, in one respect, if I had $1 million, I think I would buy a private golf course because I have never played golf. I've played golf several times, but I was so terrible on the course that I got edgy about the people behind me chasing, griping, complaining, when's that guy going to get off that green?
Well, I think the 50s brought us right into the age of the plastic garbage can.
That's what Norma King has to say about the decade we're in. And this is Off the Cuff, a half hour dedicated to the proposition that a little good old-fashioned talk's always pleasant. I'm Ed King, and again tonight I've invited 4 friends to sit down with you and me for some candid, unrehearsed, transcribed yakety on a question that I hope intrigues you. It does me. How will we remember the 1950s? When someone says the 1920s, why, we immediately recall the flappers, bootleggers, raccoon coats, whoopee, jazz age, era of wonderful nonsense. When someone says the 1930s, we think of the Depression years, the bread lines, soup kitchens. The 1940s, we think of course, as the war years. Well, how will we sum up the 1950s? Let's meet our friends and see what they think. This is Myron Cope. Myron, you are a sports reporter for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and certainly a man of distinction now that you have had a story printed in the Saturday Evening Post. How does all that new wealth feel, Myron?
Well, all that new wealth is maybe not so much new wealth as you think it is, but still it feels pretty good.
I think it's nice to be able to sit right across the table from a man who's had an article in the Saturday Evening Post. In addition to Myron Cope, we have Mercedes Beechler. Mrs. Beechler is a housewife and mother of 10 children, and it's hard to believe looking at you, Mercedes.
Gee, you're nice, Ed.
And Norma King is a nightclub singer who's currently appearing at the Horizon Room. Right, Norma?
That's right, Ed.
Singing in a nightclub, do you get requests for old standards more than you do for new tunes?
It all depends on the room, Ed. Now, in a room like the Horizon, which is more or less a Class A room, and you get a sedate crowd, and they don't particularly care for the rock and roll type of thing, so I don't do it.
Well, I was thinking, Norma, perhaps it's right in line with our discussion here tonight. Perhaps the 1950s will be remembered as the decade when we tried to remember all the other decades. People keep liking to hear the music from the 20s and the 30s so continuously.
Well, if people in 1960 still want to hear rock and roll from the 1950s, we're certainly not progressing any at all.
This is an independent singer here.
We have Mike Levine with us. Mike is a KDKA radio reporter. Let's start it with you, Mike. How do you think we'll sum up the 1950s?
Well, Ed, I have a little theory all my own.
Let's hear it.
I think there's a darn good possibility that one of these days we'll all have one split second when we'll gaze up into the sky at that blinding flash and realize that during the 1950s, that was the time, the decade that they invented the atom. This is just a theory. It could be, but seriously, though, if we do get past the potential possible blinding flash in the sky, that we will look back on the 1950s as the time when they first started giving us atomic power, atomic heat. It's a very weighty thought I have, but I recall the other day when I saw a news item came in over the ticker about this atomic sub, the Nautilus, isn't it?
That's right.
And my gosh, I thought of the distance that thing has traveled, the time it's spent without loading up with coal or diesel oil or anything. That thing sailed so many thousands of miles for so darned long without refueling.
Well, also, Mike, here in the area, Shippingport, they're building this atomic plant for electrical conversion. Do you think that'll be completed by the end of the 50s so that we will be getting heat and light
Well, the timetable calls for it to be completed pretty soon, but as I thought about those things, I thought maybe someday I could drive for the next year and a half in my little flivver without loading up on it with another tank full of atomic fuel. I thought maybe someday, instead of going down to shovel the ashes out of the furnace, I'd throw a switch and would open up the atomic reactor down in the basement a little more. And big things are going to happen, and though they're coming from the beginnings in the 1950s, I think they'll be the atomic 50s.
Norma, how do you feel? Do you think that the atom is going to be the thing you'll think about when you look back on the 1950s?
I don't know. While Mike was talking, I was thinking how many people, we ordinary people, think of the atom in terms of the wonderful good that it is going to do. I mean, we read about the Nautilus, and it goes right out of our mind that this fabulous ship can go so many miles without refueling. And when you mention atom, I think everybody's first instinct is fear. They only think of it as a destructive force and remember the damage that it did do, and that someday we may have to use it again, or somebody may use it on us. But even with all there is written in the paper of atomic power and the Nautilus and other things of that kind, I still think the average person is thinking of it in terms of a destructive agency.
I'm of the opinion, although I have no expert knowledge to back up my opinion, that we have been far too slow in developing peacetime uses of the atom, and perhaps that's why people still think of it in terms of fear.
Mercedes,
we could get a move on there, I think, in that department. I think you're thinking, when you think in terms of this being a period dominated by the atom, you are thinking in terms of something made by man and a development of man, and not in terms of what the man in this time is like himself. And that's another question, and I think it's the man that characterizes the period. I think, Ed, that this is a period of conformity, and I think it might be called the time of the reptile, time when everybody is trying to fit into a mold and be a real substantial person. You don't see different people so much anymore, characters, people just acting on whims. Everybody is paying off a mortgage and attempting to just keep moving on.
We've put the eccentrics out of business, Myron.
That's right.
No one can afford to be
Everybody
different.
wants to be substantial and dignified. For instance, in my line of work, which is sports writing, now I've only been working down here for 5 years, and I speak mostly, when I talk of when I compare the present with the past, I'm talking mostly from what I've heard and read of the past. But in the old days, if you wrote something that a ball player didn't like, why, he either punched you right in the nose, or he invited you to step under the grandstand.
Ted Williams
today,
now.
in which, well, if he invited you under the grandstand, you just ran, if you were smart, I suppose. But nowadays, if you write something they don't like, why, they come up to you and they say, I don't believe this is in good taste. An athlete is equipped to punch you in the nose, but not equipped to say that this is not in good taste. Now, what I'm getting at is everybody is being substantial, not acting rashly, not doing anything on the spur of the moment. Everybody's too reasonable nowadays.
In other words, it's the decade of the educated ball player.
Well, that's one part of it, yes.
I'm glad I didn't wear my gray flannel suit today.
Do you think people...
You can read, you can do it yourself.
I have a question to ask.
Mike?
Myron, you said that this is the era of complacency, compliance. Well, everybody's being just like everybody else. I agree with you to this extent, that it's the thing to do now, to buy a little place out in the suburbs, mow the lawn. Everybody's buying cars, they have mortgages. Is this bad, my boy? Is this bad?
Well, I don't know if it's bad. It's certainly it's wholesome. No, it's wholesome. It's just depressing, though, at the same time. There's no
individuality.
Pardon me?
No individuality, Myron.
That's right. There's no individuality, and perhaps it's not so good when you get into the realm of ideas, because nobody you stop moving forward when you stop having people who come out and disagree and have new ideas. And some of the great geniuses who have made the atom development and all that possible have been nutty people, actually. Some of them have been in many respects. But I don't know that they might, if they were living in this age now, if they were in their 20s, for instance, they might decide to get a good paying job at 150 or 200 a week as an engineer maybe, or whatever it be, and just stick to building refrigerators and things of that sort.
Mentioning the refrigerator, we summed up the 20s a while ago as being the jazz age. Do you think the 50s will be the rock and roll age, Mercedes?
I do. Believe me, I have 4 teenagers, and I know all the rock and roll songs that are on.
And Elvis Presley shall lead them.
Positively. Hound dog.
The blind leading the blind.
The songs don't carry the sincerity they did. Maybe it's because the authors aren't very hungry.
I do believe that. I think it has an awful lot to do with producing talent. I mean, if you really have to go out and, by working hard, make something, it's made.
Well, I don't think that that's the reason for the lack of good tunes. I think maybe the good tunes are being written, and maybe have been written in just as much quantity as before.
But you're just not as enthused as you were then.
No, I think that it's a fault of what is being played and promoted. Everything that is played is done so on the basis of its sales at the local record store, and I think that's the big reason for it. I nearly wreck my car every day driving it to work listening to the songs that are being played by the disc jockeys.
Well, we've got anything else in the 1950s that really stands out in your mind now that you think, by golly, this is the thing?
Well, as a radio newsman, I know there are a million things on the in the field of current events that we could have mentioned.
Yes, but I don't think you recall an era because of an event that occurred in it. The Titanic is the Andrea Doria. I mean, these are isolated incidents that, because of their isolation, stand out so firmly in our mind. How about the motion picture lack, or how about the increase in TV? Do you think 1950 is the year of the television? Norma?
Oh, I think, Ed, that we're going to remember it particularly because color has made such advanced strides, and probably in another 5 or 6 years there'll be nothing but color shows. And, which will make
Well, that's all the time we have for Off the Cuff tonight, but you're welcome to continue the conversation with your own friends. How do you think we'll sum up the 1950s? You've heard the Off the Cuff opinions of Norma King, nightclub singer who's appearing at the Horizon Room, Mercedes Beechler, housewife, mother of 10 children, Mike Levine, KDKA radio reporter, and Myron Cope, sports reporter for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Now, before we fold up our microphone for the night, won't you tie a string around the radio to remind you to be with us a week from tonight? We're going to have 4 more friends stop by to talk with you and me on some other provocative subject. Come up with some candid, unrehearsed, transcribed parlor talk produced by Bob Parks and all off the cuff from your Westinghouse station.